now, those are the basic values, but I want to talk to you about a few different ways that we're going to use those values and some different ways that you might see some of those same notes. The first is a dot. So if we have a note that has a dot next to it, hopefully you remember the rule, and that is what? We add half of the original value. Please don't be confused and just add a half to every single note that has a dot next to it, and that happens all the time. Every semester somebody does it, usually more than one person. The dot adds half the value of the original note because it could be next to different kinds of notes. It could be next to this note. It could even be next to a whole note. So if the original value is 2 of this note right here, we would add a half of that 2. What's half of 2? 1. So this note right here would be worth 3 beats. And we call this a dotted half note. Let's do this one together. How many beats is this quarter note normally? 1 in most music. Dot adds half of the value. So what's half of 1? A half. So this whole thing is 1.5. And we just call that a dotted quarter note. Let's do this last one, which you probably won't see very often. But whole note, normally we said in a lot of music, is 4 beats. The dot adds half of 4. What's half of 4? Dos. So this whole thing would be worth 6 in what we consider common time. It works the same way with eighth notes. That's when you have to remember how to add and do fractions. But if we have a dotted eighth note, now remember, is an eighth note worth an eighth of a beat? No. An eighth note we just said, and rewind if you forgot, an eighth note we said is normally worth a half of a beat. The dot adds half of a half, which we said was a fourth. So we have half plus a fourth. If you cook, you might be able to just add that up in your head, or if you remember your fraction math, that a half plus a fourth equals 3/4. But if you forgot and you can't do that in your head, how do we add fractions? Common denominator. So 1/2 becomes 2/4 plus 1/4, which equals 3/4. Now, do musicians have to sit there and think, 1/2 plus 2? No, they don't. You just kind of know the feeling, you know how to play it. This is just the math behind it, which is music fundamentals, okay? But that's how you would do that. You would do it the same way with the 16th note, which was on one of your homework, but you would just take that value of the 16th note, which is a fourth. You'd add half of a fourth. What's half of a fourth? An eighth. Find the common denominator. I don't even know if I could do that one in my head without it. A fourth becomes 2/8 plus 1/8. So this is 3/8. The dotted one. Oops, I forgot my dot. So anyway, again, does a musician have to sit there and think, I need to play 3/8 of a beat? No, absolutely not. In fact, if you told someone you're playing 3/8 of a beat, they might be like, okay. But it doesn't really affect the playing, the math behind it. But again, that is our class, so we're learning about it. Okay, so there's how we work the dots. Now I want to just do some combination notes with you, because sometimes you're going to see the notes we already talked about kind of all stuck together. So I just call them combination notes. I'm not sure if that's exactly academically correct, but it works for me. So sometimes you might see this, and then you might think, Ms. Gladish never told me that. That's not on my chart. That's not anywhere. Well, it is. It's just different notes kind of stuck together. So what you need to do is kind of take it piece by piece. If you take the first part of this note, there's one beam on the top. So what kind of a note is that? That is an eighth note. That eighth note we said is not worth an eighth of a beat. It's worth half of a beat. These two notes right here have two beams. So what kind of notes are those? Those are 16th notes. That's the fourth of a beat each. So each of those is a fourth of a beat. So a fourth plus a fourth is a half, okay? So this whole thing is a half and a half, which is 1. Basically, this note right here gets the first half of the beat, and these two notes right here get the second half of the beat. So the way that this one sounds, it's kind of like 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a something like that. Or you might have learned T, tika, or something different. But that's how you would perform that. Works the same way if it's reversed. My marker's dying. I hope you guys can read that. So these first two notes right here would be the 16th notes. Let's trade that out for a second. There we go. These first two notes have two beams, so those would be the 16th note, so those would be the fourth of a beat each. And this one right here has the one beam, so that would be my 8th note, which would get a half a beat. Same thing, one beat altogether. We would just do that kind of backwards as the one we did before. It's kind of like two shorter notes followed by the second half of the beat, which is another short note, but those are shorter, okay? So this one would be kind of like 1E and, 2E and, 3E and, or some people do tika T, or something like that, and you just memorize that feeling. Another thing that you might see would be using some of those dots in combination. So you might see, all my markers are dying. You might see this and think, what is that? I've never seen that before. You just do the same thing. How many beams is it? Okay, it has one beam, so it is an 8th note with a dot. We did that one earlier before when we did it like this with the flag on it. Okay, so that's your 3/4 of a beat we did earlier today. And then this one, what is that random line right there? It's not a random line, it's just the part of the beam. You can't draw it all the way across, or that would make this one the 16th note too. So you just draw a little smidgen of a line there, and that's your 16th note. 16th note gets that last fourth of this full beat. So this whole thing is one beat. I hope you can read that okay. And this one is almost kind of like a galloping feeling. 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to something like that, okay? Except you probably wouldn't be counting to 5. But 1 to 2 to 3 to something like that it would sound like. So that's an overview, I think, of a lot of the combination notes that you're going to see. Again, just take it piece by piece. Figure out how many beams it has, where the dot is, which dot the note applies to, which note the dot applies to, and then you can add it up from there. The last thing I want to talk to you guys about is ties. And a tie is what you might see in a measure to make a note that maybe we don't have a value for, meaning you're going to add together a couple of notes is one possibility. So say we have this note, but the composer really wants that to be held a little teeny bit longer. Well, we don't really have a note that would be equivalent to, say, a quarter note and a 16th note, which would be like 1 1/4 of a beat. We don't really have a note like that. So what they might do is they would add this little tie to it right there, which means that you add the duration of both of those beats together. So this note we would hold down for 1E, 1 and the beginning of that 16th note right there. Another thing that you might see is sometimes in between two measures, and we'll talk about measures later, but a measure is the distance between these two bar lines, and it's the notes in between those two bar lines, and this is the bar line. So the notes that are in between those bar lines, and usually those need to add up to a certain number, which we're going to talk about in chapter 3. But if the composer already has, so say we're in 4/4, which means that there has to be a total of 4, which we talk about in chapter 3. But say the composer already has that in there, which, what is that? That's my dotted half. So normally it would get 2, the dot adds 1, so this gets 3. But if that composer really wanted right there, the sound that they wanted was 2 more beats, they couldn't really put that in there because then it'd be too many beats since there only could be 4 in. Now they technically could add one random measure of 5/4, but to make it easier, they're just gonna do that. So this still is 2 beats. It just has a tie across the bar line, and that makes it easy to read. We hold it the same, we play it the same as what would be that half note in there, but it makes it correct as far as the time signature goes. So that is the overview of chapter 2. If this does not make sense to you, you really need to study this and make sure that you understand. Make sure you have the names of the notes, the values of the notes in your head, because it's kind of the foundation for chapter 3. I mean, not kind of, it is. You've got to know this to move on to chapter 3. So please be diligent about memorizing these names, values, and then chapter 3 will make a lot of sense to you.